Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. This episode is brought to you by 40 Accounting. 40 Accounting is built to help out your bookkeeping, accounting, and taxes for small to mid-sized businesses. If you're not getting the information you need and the timeliness that you expect, and you need that information to help run your business, reach out to 40accounting.com. Really excited to have with us our guest, Dr. James Chitwood. As you can see, he is the author of Leadership is Not Enough. He's an organizational leadership expert, consultant, and founder of performanceculture.expert. He's also an Army infantry veteran and former university president. He's led multiple organizations to record-breaking performance and cultural transformation. He's a sought-after speaker, and he also is involved in a lot of other really cool organizations that we'll talk about here soon enough. And a controversial, I'll hold on to that, controversial conversation we'll talk about is whether capitalism is at risk. And we'll go with Jim if we're being comfortable with that, James. I know it's Dr. James Chitwood, but Jim, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Thank you, Carl. Happy to be here.
So for those of you who haven't heard who you are beforehand, just give your sense of what's your kind of bio and how are you making a difference in the world today?
Yeah, so I'm the story of the person from a challenging childhood who joined the military to escape my past, learn some discipline, get some college fund money, go to Germany while I was at it because it was on their dime, and see the world a little bit, and then went to college and just kept one degree after another, one career advancement after another, just kept moving forward. And so, I'm that guy that I really want to make a difference in this world. My car, my watch, the only thing that matters is that I know that I'm doing good and I'm left the world a little better than I found it. So it's kind of like, that's my ethos right there, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if you don't mind, because I'm kind of always curious, my brother kind of had a similar situation. He also went to the Army. He also was in Germany, interestingly enough, right? And he went in, we had a tough upbringing, and it's kind of same thing. The discipline of the Army helped him to properly get out and be a contributor, right, to society, which was fantastic after we went through that. I'm kind of curious for you, as you talked about that discipline. I literally, you may not be, I just had a son that just graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy last week.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. So we just went through this process ourselves. I'm kind of curious for you, as once again, when you probably had no idea what you were really getting into. Right. And then you got into it and you're getting screamed at, right. And yelled at in boot camp. Right. And then next thing you know, you're on the Germany, I'm assuming near Cold War. I don't know exactly the time period when you were there or not, but tell me about that transformation of this troubled kid, so to speak. And then here you are serving in the Army.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. So in full transparency, I graduated high school just barely. And I was addicted to meth. I used Army as, it was my drug rehab. And if you think infantry basic training is hard, try doing it coming off of that drug. It was hard. But in full transparency, I thought I'd kill myself because I was going through those issues. And luckily I did not. And then all of a sudden I'm in this job, right, as a soldier, and I'm in a society, and the expectation is just so different. And the beauty of the military is that we all come from such different backgrounds, and everybody in there is just so different. And one of the guys in my platoon, literally, he's the story of, he hid his shotgun in the trash can around the corner in the alley and had been arrested so many times that a judge finally said, "Listen, no kidding, you're either signing up or you're going to jail. Take your pick." It was that guy, right? So I didn't have that one. So, but then we're all soldiers and we're all together, right? And our pasts are no longer relevant because we all wear the same patch. And that camaraderie that is built, they talk about your brothers and sisters in arms, and there's just nothing like it, to come from our different backgrounds and then all of a sudden be united on this cause and to be together and to have hope. Right. For many of us, it was our kind of a first time. And so it's just such a powerful experience. It's hard to explain, really, what that camaraderie is really like.
It's so interesting because, today the military is only 1% of the civilian. It's such a smaller percentage compared to where it used to be. But I think it's such a missing component and opportunity for young men and women that come from all, as you mentioned, all different backgrounds, but the opportunity to, as you said, learn to be a part of a team. Yes, it's in a forced way, but it's for a reason, right? They're talking about the Naval Academy, positive pressure with a purpose. And when we had the first parents weekend after, what they call Plebe Summer, which is effectively boot camp, they were like, just do us a favor, please. Don't undo what we've been working on for the last 3 months, don't undo that, in a short period of time, because because you have to change your habits, right? You have to change your mannerisms. You have to change who you are, your identity, right?
Mhm.
To become a different person.
I know a
So
couple boys who I wasn't too. They're in the neighborhood, and I didn't know exactly what was going to happen with them. They were not your most dedicated individuals, we'll just say, and they both joined the Coast Guard and are now totally different human beings. And it is so fantastic to just watch this progression. I knew them as little boys, and now they see them as men. Just as boys, I would have never let them watch my house. Now I wouldn't think twice about it.
yeah, yeah. How about that? I mean, that's once again just a great example, right, of how something, an institution, a system, and being a part of something that's bigger than yourself, right? I think is a big part of that as well. And so awesome. Thanks for sharing that part behind it.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
of course, we have to talk about your book, and so let's start with why. Why did you write "Leadership Is Not Enough"?
Yeah, so I married up, Carl, and my wife had been telling me for a long time to go out and consult. And so many people in my doctoral program, whatever tools they used to quantify their research, right? Whatever the assessment tools were, they became experts in it, and then that's what they taught as consultants. That didn't interest me. I had to have an original thought. I had to have an original idea, and so I was in a situation where I was in this. So my last phase of my career was a startup space, where I'd help one organization start a new division, grow itself, whatever. And that's a very short term reality, right? If you're in the startup space, you understand this isn't a 20-year, 5-year, this is like months to years, right? And so the last one I did it in 9 months. And then my wife's like, all right, Jim, I've been telling you for a while to consult. And I didn't have that aha moment until I sat back and really thought about it. And the military experience, as well as my career, so many things came together that I had that bright moment in my head. And that's when I decided, okay, I have something unique to give to the world. Now I can go out and be a consultant.
Good for you. Good for you. So you have developed these four key things: TRAC, TRAC, as an acronym for training, recognition, accountability, and communication. So why? Why did you come down to those four pieces in this model?
Yeah, man. So I was, and when I did this at the time, I didn't really get it. It wasn't until that aha moment that it became clear. In the moment, it was just what I saw. So I was involved in a turnaround. I was brought in to turn around an organization sales operation. So 7 brands, national, multiple regulatory agencies, really bad environment, really underperforming. Termination was through the roof. It was terrible. And I was brought in to turn it around. And so I had this giant whiteboard. I see your whiteboard behind your head and I'm jealous. I miss a whiteboard, let me tell you. I had this giant whiteboard and I had everything written down that we were going to be working on. And I had 5 columns and I didn't know what I had done, but I had training, recognition, accountability, communication, and then miscellaneous. And I had these long lists of things on this board. And it wasn't until later that I saw them in that way. At the time, I was just knee deep in cutting the grass. I couldn't see the lawn, right? Until I was able to sit back on the porch and go, aha, that's what it was. That's what we were focused on. That was the meat to turn that organization around, was the basics of running an organization.
Yeah, that's good. So when you teach this to a new organization for the first time and they haven't been a part of it, or they've been struggling, or you're part of a turnaround, as you mentioned beforehand, what's their big aha?
Well, it's funny. I think the communication piece is always the one that catches people. Organizations spend so much money on what I call brand speak, right? Your external communication. And then unfortunately, what they do is they turn that around and they give it right back to their people. Well, you need to talk to your employees in ways that resonates for them doing their job. How does what you say help them do their job? And if it doesn't, why are you telling it to them in the first place, right? And so it's understanding how do we create an internal communication strategy? And that's really the piece, right? It can't just be, oh, we got something to say. It's how is this a strategic element of our organization that's going to help us perform? If it doesn't, don't say it.
So I'm curious on the accountability side.
Yeah. Because I was going to say that's the other one. So many people
Yeah,
don't
because
have goals for their people. Like so many organizations, especially small ones, it's just other duties is assigned. It's just, oh, how do you know if this person's a success? And then the person comes into their annual review, they have no idea. No employee should walk into an annual review already not knowing the outcome. And they know the outcome because you've been talking to them every week for 52 weeks, and they fully understand where they're sitting, right?
And I love that. I mean, because that's what you said there. And it is, being myself, once again, a consultant for multiple small to mid-sized companies, but also on the other side, right? running my own small business, multiple small businesses. Yeah, it's when you're especially in those early stages, and you're growing so fast, and people are doing, as you said, other duties assigned. The risk is, how do you know you're being successful? I recently hired my other son, not the ones in Naval Academy, who has a finance and accounting degree, and he, just being honest, one day, and he was basically saying, I've got so much on my plate right now. How do I measure success, for lack of a better term, right? And
Okay. Right.
and it's like, okay, let's I have to work on things to make that better, right? As we're in these high growth scaling up. But yeah, these are real legitimate issues. Now, I'm kind of curious on the recognition side, because recognition's fascinating, because we all want it, but people seem to want it in different ways. The really introverted people are like, please don't mention me out loud, right? And then of course you have the people who are more extroverts, like they want to run up on that stage and get the award.
Yeah.
How do you help with that recognition? And what do you mean when you're saying recognition?
Yeah. So recognition for most organizations has the same dimensions as a sheet of paper, right? Like it's pretty simple. Most organizations think compensation is a form of recognition or a little plaque, right? And to your point, that doesn't resonate with everybody. Right. And so you have to have a true recognition strategy. And I believe that there's a few components to it. Number one, you have to be able to, well, first, you have to have accountability. So you know what you're measuring people so that you can recognize their performance. So that's key, right? You have to have a way to do that. Two, you have to have a way for people to recognize each other. Because the interesting thing about that introvert is that getting up on that stage because their boss says they did great is significantly less powerful for them than getting on that stage because their coworker said they did a good job, right? Like they don't do it for themselves. It's just kind of how most of these people are, right? I'm an introvert. I've learned not to be, but I am. But when they're getting recognized for helping someone else, that is more powerful than a pat on the back from the boss any day of the week, right?
Hmm.
And then you also have to have the way for departments to recognize each other. So inter and intra departmental recognition has to be part of your strategy, right? So you have to have an employee be able to say, hey, I got my job done because Carl did this thing, right? And then you have to have departments be able to say, hey, we got our job done because Jim and Carl did this thing. Right. And so when you do that, you're moving beyond the boss up here says it's great. So it's great. It's we are saying it's great. And the power is always in the we.
Good. That's awesome. I appreciate you going through that part. Now, I'm curious, of course, the very beginning is the training piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? And boy, we all recognize training is so important, but the results of training seems to be atrocious historically, right? The data. It's less than 10% roughly of things are actually absorbed from an actual
Uh-huh.
training materials. How do we, especially in any size organization, how do we make training stick?
It has to be a cultural norm, A. So it's not just, hey, we're doing training. We are always training. The military is a training organization. If you're not performing your duty, you're training for your duty. One of those two things all the time, right? Always be training. So in how do you make it stick? One, you got to make it a cultural norm. Two, you have to rethink who's doing the training. I like training departments as instructional designers. I do not like training departments as trainers. The trainers need to be the coworkers and the supervisors. Those need to be the people doing it, right? And so every employee does something great, right? Every employee brings value in some way better than someone else does. So have that person be doing the training, right? Empower them. And what's so neat about this is this ties to recognition too. Listen, you got somebody suffering from depression, go work in a soup kitchen. Why? Because when we give, we gain, right? We lift up when we give to someone else. So when you have an employee training someone else, two things happen. Well, multiple. Number one, the person training is giving themselves to this other person, and now they're more invested in that person's success, right? The receiver now has received something from that person. So there's a stronger bond because that person gave to them. Right. And so when you can look at training as how we run our organization, not something we do when we believe we need to, it totally changes the ethos of how it runs. I'm working with an organization right now, and they have a it's a coffee roasting company. They have cafes as well. Immense training for all the cafe personnel, but nothing for the lab really. Right. It's just go
Right.
roast a coffee. Right. Well, maybe that coffee roaster would like to learn to do something else. Who can help them learn that? And how do you build that in? How do you structure it? Right? Listen, the Ebbinghaus learning curve is a real thing, right? I mean, the knowledge drop is steep, right? And so that's why if you're consistently reinforcing it and you have others reinforcing it with each other, then it has a probability of sticking.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. That's really good insights there. All right. So now we're going to hit on the thing that I mentioned early on, which is this controversy. All
Let's
right.
do it.
Okay. So you said something interesting prior to this. You said that capitalism is at risk. Why?
Because we've lost sight on the fundamental principles of capitalism, right? If you go back to Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, everybody looks at it as a free market. That's what makes it. And that's an outcome of the inputs. And the input is voluntary participation of labor and a business owner with a great idea. They come together, they create a symbiotic relationship, and they grow together, right? That used to be the way organizations run. When we got started, it was get any degree, go get a job, they'll teach you what you need to do, and you'll just consistently learn and grow within the organization. It's also one of the reasons that training is so screwed now, is because it's the first thing to get cut, right? It's totally seen as happenstance. And so we've lost sight on the fact that your greatest asset is not your intellectual property. It's the ones who created it, right? It's your employees. They're your asset, right? They're the ones that you can develop over time. You can't develop a machine. You can develop a frontline employee to become your CEO. Most organizations now, you can't become the CEO of that company because they're going to hire somebody from the outside. Right. And so once upon a time, when we saw employees as assets, we developed them over time. Now we see them as liabilities. And I am not a fan of Jack Welch. I will own that right now. I really believe that GE's dead, right? It was the globe and he killed it. Why? Because he chased a quarterly gain. That's why. Right. It wasn't in it for the long haul. It was all about the quarterly gain. And too many of his people are now running organizations with the same mindset that it's all about that quarter gain. We got to find the cheapest labor we possibly can. These are nothing but assets. Every year, we got to get rid of people just to clean our books. And that is so antithetical to how an organization runs over the long term. I mean, look, if you're in it for the quarter, great. That works fine. If you're in it for 5 years, that doesn't work. You know the story of the Nintendo CEO? I cannot pronounce this gentleman's name, and he's not the CEO at the time anymore. But you know the story where he took a pay cut?
No,
It's a
go.
fascinating story, man. So Nintendo had delivered a couple bad products to market, and their earnings were suffering badly. And he took a 50% pay cut, and all of his people took a 30% pay cut. And the company struggled a little, but it came back, and it's now very, very strong. And being interviewed, he said, "Yeah, listen, I could have cut people, and we would have looked great for the quarter or even the year. But 5 years later, we would have been worse off. Why? Because how could my people do their best work if they were worried about being on the chopping block?" And that's the point, right? When your employees see themselves as liabilities, they're never going to give you their best work because they're always going to be on LinkedIn. They're always going to be thinking about a job. When they believe, here's an interesting fact. If the employees believe you have their back, even if they don't have yours, if they believe you have their back, they are more inclined to work harder. Fascinating.
This is a really interesting conversation. It's part of where I've experienced this. I've been involved in lean transformations with multiple companies and did it first within a company and learned, quote unquote, the right way how to do this. And of course, this comes from the Toyota way, if people are familiar with those concepts, of those who are listening. But one of the key things you learn is why the name lean doesn't work very well is because people think employers are going to get leaned out. And that's not the goal. The goal is to be a very effective, a very efficient company. And matter of fact, if you do it right, you actually get to keep your employees because you're not looking for offshore manufacturing. You're not looking to outsource everything. You're looking to actually to create value here and today. But the mere fear of I might lose my job because we're implementing XYZ, or in today's day, we're implementing AI, right? Which is the great fear today.
Right.
If people think they're going to lose their job as a result of it, you're not always likely to get your best, right? Because they're going to sabotage it. They're going to talk about how it doesn't work. They're going to say things how it makes things up, talking whatever you want to use the system, and they'll find ways for it not to work. My understanding is I think they've said it publicly, but one of the major computer makers is they're trying to go underneath 100,000 employees and be $1 billion company. And so there is fear rampant throughout the organization, right? Because of this movement that's been taking place. And so fear can have its value at times, right? I can imagine when you were in boot camp, if you don't stand up straight, there's a bit of fear there, right? You know,
Absolutely.
if you don't have your
Yeah.
uniform on straight, there's a bit of fear there, right? Of the risk of not being. But when it stifles innovation and creativity and those things of that nature, that's when it fails
That's when it's
often,
bad. Yeah.
right? So I think it's super interesting that you're mentioning about this of how this can
And
be at
Carl,
risk. Yeah, go ahead,
here's
please.
an interesting thing. There's a $74 billion global industry on leadership development. If you go into Barnes and Noble, if you can find one these days, and you go into the business section for books, it's all leadership, right? We've lost sight of the fact that people are people, and you have to manage them before you can lead them. You have to
Hmm.
deal with the basics of running your organization, right? And if you do it right, then they will lead themselves. But you still have to lead them, right? But you got to start with one of the for most Gallup organizations, State of the Workplace talked about this, that employees and frontline managers fear those one-on-one conversations. Why? Because nobody taught the manager how to have it, right? So they just go in there and they're shooting from the hip without a good target to hit. They don't know what they're doing, right? And so you've got these people that have no idea, they're coming in totally scared. The manager's not too sure what to do, but he or she's getting pressure. So that pressure just comes out. But if they know what they're doing and it's methodical and they're going through the same steps every time, right? And your employee comes to the meeting with their own data. So they already know how they're doing. Why? Because they have clear accountability metrics that they can use to define their measurement of success. Then you've created a solid and strong foundation for leadership. That's why my book's called Leadership is Not Enough. It doesn't say leadership doesn't matter. It just says it's not enough. And that's really the key there.
Yeah, well said. My wheels are spinning. This has been a fun conversation because,
Good.
and I'm going to go back to these military comparisons just because of your
Sure.
background, but also for those around there. Most people know who a Navy SEAL is, right? Some of
Yeah.
the most trained, well, let me clarify, some of the most elite, right, soldiers, right, that we have in our military. And of course, each of the respective branches have their special warfare, which
Everyone
are
does.
incredibly. But I was just watching American Sniper again,
Okay.
recently. And there's this interesting scene where the main character, right, he's like, hey, I'm going to go in and help the Marines and door to door because I've been trained for years on how to do this while they've just been maybe 3 months ago, they just came off of the street. And what was interesting was the training and the continuous training gave him confidence and
Yeah.
creativity to be
Right.
more successful, right? And I'm going to go back to this lean now, going back to the workplace. One of the greatest joys I've always had in these type of things is when a frontline worker whole perspective of their self-worth changes because for the first time in their career, they're being heard and how
Yeah.
to actually implement a change that truly makes a difference.
Totally. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Psychological safety is the strongest driver of employee performance. Hands down, bar none. That's it. Number one, psychological safety. There is no other measure that comes even close to getting the best out of your people as creating an environment where they know they can disagree and be heard and not have retribution happen to them, right? They're able to come up with ideas. They know you want to hear what they have to say. One of my favorite things to do as a leader is to have someone come up to me and say, I don't know, what do you think? I don't have an
Mm,
answer, but I want to hear what they think. Right. And so my people always knew I'm not always going to agree with them, but they can come up to me and tell me whatever the heck they want. And that's fine. And I want that. If your people are always agreeing with you, you got a problem. In the army, there's this old saying, if your soldiers aren't complaining, you got a problem, and the problem is you.
mm, mm, That's well said. Well said. Okay. When you're working with your clients,
Mhm.
how are you measuring success?
Every org is different. Right now, I'm helping one came in to help their sales operations because it is my background, and that's running quite well. And now we're working on the training. Right, you got to do this in pieces depending on the size of the company. Right, it's a small company, and now we're working on the training. So I think it's situationally specific. Right, our next phase will be when we have a fully robust training program for every employee to develop not only their professional skills, but skills that interest them as well, right? That's something that we've lost is that there might be something else in the company that person is interested in learning. And yeah, they have a job, but their interest lies somewhere else. right? And so when we have created this, that will be a success. So sales ops, that's working really well. So it's definitely situation specific, depending on what that organization is attempting to achieve.
Good. So Jim, I'm kind of curious about you. I mean, you've pretty incredible. I mean, you just talked about it. Wow. Started out addicted to drugs, head in the military, difficult background, head in the military, cleaned up. Now you have this PhD, and you are teaching other people how to do things. That took a lot to get to there, right? That wasn't an overnight event.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So what habits do you do today on a consistent basis that really help you continue to perform at an excellent level?
You use the word consistency. You have to have a schedule. You have to do it repeatedly. You have to find out what drives you, what helps you, and then do that all the time, over and over and over again, every day, every day. And that's really the key. If you're not sure where you're going, how are you going to get there, right? And if you do know where you're going, then you have to have a plan to get there, and you got to stick to that plan every single day, right? So, the main thing I say to anybody is build a routine and stick to it, right? Whatever your routine is, and spend some time not with a screen, right? Spend quiet time. It's the only chance our brain has to think, right? To really process is when we don't have stimuli coming in. And so, I tell people to find an opportunity at least several times a week to spend at least a half hour without any stimuli so that you have a chance to really process what's going on. I try to do that every day. It's not just meditation, because meditation, you're trying to empty your mind. Here, I'm letting my mind run, because that's the only way that I can connect to my deeper thoughts and connect to the universe.
Awesome. Okay. What type of, now let's go on a bit on the personal side. One of the things you talked about, I think, which is really cool that you're doing is you have C-Suite for Christ. So tell us
Yes,
about
sir.
that program, where you're doing, and why have you helped be a part of that program?
Yeah. So it's 8 years old. It's started by a gentleman named Paul Newberg, up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so I've been driving to Milwaukee from Chicago. I live in Chicagoland, and I've been driving up there for almost a year now. And when I was first signed up to be a member, they asked, would you like to be a president? Because we don't have a chapter. They looked at my background, of course, and they said, hey, you'd be a great leader here. How about we open a chapter in Chicago? I said, not my path, right? And then I was asked by the founder in March, actually, if I would be interested. And at the time I said, I'll pray on it. I said, because you've asked, one thing I've learned about God is that God will ask a couple times, right? And then you don't want the third ask, right? Because that's typically more challenging. So I decided to lean in just to try to heal the divisions in our society. When I got started in my career, when we got started, there was a separation of church and state in the workplace, right? Your religion, your politics, your sex life, none of this had any place in the workplace. We were colleagues. Yes, there were some bigots, but the most of us, we didn't care what you did outside. In here, let's work. And that's all that matters. Well, now the only thing taboo at work is God.
Mm,
Everything else is fair game. And it is, I really believe it's tearing our society apart. And here's the thing. We're bringing faith to work, not religion. They're two drastically different things, right? The three largest religions all have the same God, and they've been killing each other for thousands of years over who worships him correctly or her correctly, right? Like it's absurd, right? Truly absurd. And don't even get me started on that. So, the whole thing is about how do we help people be comfortable showing their faith at work, and maybe helping someone else find their faith journey and find the fellowship of community. And that's really, really strong. It's powerful. So many people don't have community, right? And so many Christian leaders, we hide our crosses when we get to work, right? Well, now I don't. I leave it out. But once upon a time, I would. If I remember, I was going to a job interview and I had a cross lapel pin, small one. And the recruiter said, hey, Jim, you need to take that off before you walk into that interview. And I did. And I've always regretted doing that ever since, right? And so I lived, for a very long time. I was what I called a complacent Christian. I didn't want to offend anybody. So I said the universe instead of God, right? Because I didn't want to offend whoever I was talking to, right? Well, I don't do that anymore. And if someone comes back with the universe, I say, hey, great. Let's, you want to call it the universe? I'm calling it God. Let's meet where we are and let's find common ground. Let's focus on what unites us, not what divides us. And so most people have a belief in faith. It's the dogma of religion that loses them, but faith is a powerfully uniting force.
that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing about that. So
Thank you.
From your own perspective now, how do you measure success in your personal life?
Well, like you, I have children. And I have a wife. And so to me, my success is being here for them to help them grow and develop and have a great life. I work to live, not live to work. Right? If I was a billionaire, I wouldn't work. I'd find charity work to do. I would do stuff, right? I would give. Success to me is are the people that I touch better because I touch them, right? Am I lifting others up? And it starts in the home and then it goes out from there. It's the other reason I started C Suite for Christ. I talk to people every day to become members of the chapter here in Chicago, and I am blown away by their stories. And so many of them say, Jim, I have been praying for this for I can't even tell you how long. And when that happens, when that moment happens, I'm like, whew, there's the Holy Spirit, man. Good on you. Fantastic. I'm just doing God's will. Like, it's not me. Whatever I can do to help, I'm here to help.
Fantastic. Jim, obviously we want people to go out and read your book and buy your book, Leadership is Not Enough. I'm curious for you, what's a book that has really inspired you?
Well, you've got it sitting on the top of your shelf up there. That's one of the great management books, organizational structured books. Period. Love that. My daughter was in college and she quoted that to me a couple times, and it was so cool. It was such a proud moment when she did that. I was like, yes. First, Break All the Rules is the management book that I give to any newly promoted manager. Sign it, read it. There you go. First, Break All the Rules by the Gallup organization is one of those fundamental management books. If you learn that book, you will learn how to both manage and lead people.
Yeah, good recommendation. My good friend of mine, John Foster, who ran our first marathon respectively together. That was one of his favorite books. He told me years ago. And he interestingly was in sales as well for many years.
Okay.
And I think it's a excellent recommendation. Once again, for those who are listening, of course, we've been saying Jim, the informal part. He goes by Dr. Chitwood. Formally, where can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah. So got a website, drjameschitwood.com. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn, Dr. James Chitwood. And my book, you can find my book at leadershipisnotenough.com. And, through any of those methods, reach out to me and I'd love to chat. See how I can help you.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for being a part of the Marriage Success podcast today.
My absolute pleasure, Carl. Thank you. Good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And to everyone else who's listening, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I encourage you to go out and follow Dr. James Chitwood, go to his website, recommend his book, and learn more about what he's doing. He's been an excellent guest. And to everyone else who's listening, once again, if you've liked this, we encourage you to share with others. If you have some great recommendations, this is why we continue to grow and continue to get the great guests. We've been so grateful for that. We have nearly a 5 to 6 month backlog of guests. And so getting the opportunity to get Dr. James Chitwood to be on, we're so grateful for. So I always like to say, wishing you the very best and measuring your success. Have a great day.